Hello, this is Aaron with Chiron's Cave.
And this is Susan with Chiron's Cave.
And we're back for another episode, which should be the Bones of Astrology Part 2, I think.
Nice.
That's what we'll label it. Because in that episode, in Part 1, we talked about exaltations and how neither one of us knew where they came from. So, like, we knew that the domiciles or indignities, the rulerships, came from the Thema Mundi. And in that episode, we stated that we didn't know where the exaltations came from. So we've since have dug in and found out the reason why we didn't know is because, for the most part, astrology didn't know. Not in the modern age anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I found the episode that Chris Brennan did with Ben Dykes on the Astrology podcast, which, for anyone who's interested, was episode 255, The Origin of the Exaltations, A New Discovery. And that episode was put out in 2020.
I think so, yeah.
So the new discovery came about because of a translation of an Abu Mashar text on Hermes where he cites Hermes Trismegistus. He cites a text that's lost to what would you say? It's not extant. Is that how you would say it? We don't have he's referring to this text that supposedly Hermes Trismegistus wrote on astrology, on the exaltations. He's referring to it, Abu Mashar is. So there's this new translation of Abu Mashar's work referring to this text by Hermes Trismegistus.
Right.
Explaining the origins of the exaltations, like the logic behind where the exaltations came from. Right. So Susan and I have been sort of digging into this to try to get to the bottom of, exactly where we are currently, as far as the theories in astrology about exaltations. So that's sort of the opening,
Yeah. And and I think it's, what is it, like a 2.5 hour episode. So, in some ways, maybe it's by kind of tackling it and going in and understanding it more deeply, there's a way to pull out some and distill out some of the key reasons and concepts and, why exaltations are, what the rationale behind the exaltations are, in a bit of a more, I mean, I love the depth of it, but is there a way to, distill that for those that are kind of learning astrology, but while also giving some concrete, referential, historical sources as well, and which this main source being the Hermes, say his
Trismegistus.
That's one I always get, like, because I see it in my head and then I pronounce it differently. But yeah, so pretty powerful. Thrice greatest. And it's really neat because, and you can hear some of the enthusiasm in the episode with Chris Brennan and Ben Dykes. I mean, it really is, it's very intellectual, it's very heady, but you can also hear the enthusiasm because of the discovery of what has been, not clarified, or the point of origin has been really murky for where the exaltation concept comes from. And so they are at that point, 2020, when the episode is, they're discovering this and sort of synthesizing and pulling in and integrating all this information. So it's real time in history that we're refining the why of exaltations at that point in their episode. So that's cool. You can kind of hear that enthusiasm and that discovery,
So yeah, you point out, and this is a topic that I've been thinking about for the overall project of Chiron's Cave.
Mm.
And I see that, like, you heard Ben Dykes in that episode kind of say the same thing about his class that he at the time was going to be offering on, is it classical astrology or traditional astrology that he was going to be in 2020. And he, it's always, you see this, like, it's for, new astrologers and advanced astrologers. And like, it's like, I keep seeing this occur in astrology in general, that's being offered, like, as classes or online or in podcasts or whatever, where it's like that we're always trying to, like, pander to, maybe that's not the right word, but we're always trying to speak to beginners and advanced levels in it. And it's like, why is that? And I've been thinking about that with this, because it's like, I want to do the same thing, right? And I think it's just because we don't want to exclude anybody, I guess, in general, like, because the interest in astrology, right? It's not like football, where like 70% or 80% of the population is concerned about it. Like with astrology, it's like, who knows, probably less than 5% of the population of the world
Right.
cares about it. So it's
Although it's
like,
growing.
yeah, but I just mean, so
No,
it's like,
yeah.
so, but can you do that though? Right? Can you speak to, and like, first principles, right? Is, with astrology especially, it's always best to go back to that anyway. So even advanced level people should be thinking about the basics anyway,
Yeah. Yes.
because that's the bulk of the work, really, is understanding basic principles.
Right. Right. Well, and to that point, it's so interesting when they start to uncover and explain, basically explicate the sophisticated philosophical theory behind the Thema Mundi and how it relates to exaltations. It's like, as they're coming to that realization or explaining, you see that light and dark, the simplest of the simple of understanding of what the nature of reality is about, that they are going back to the basics, or that Hermes Trismegistus was ultimately, everything was grounded and rooted in something like terribly simple at first glance, right? Light and dark. And yet within that simplicity, everything is contained. Within that polarity, philosophically speaking, everything is contained. And so I think, like you said, the dialectic between the more sophisticated concepts of astrology and the simplistic or seemingly building blocks or fundamentals, they're both very important to always be in this dialectical process as we're continuing to advance, but also then disseminate information and share knowledge and share these teachings, because as we're understanding and uncovering too, we're uncovering alchemical teachings, we're uncovering layers of magical practice, and maybe not in the way that we think of it today, but the nature of it is not just intellectual. And that actually, I thought it was interesting when I was looking over the volume 1 how Demetra George refers to Mercury and Jupiter's oppositional energy, as it says that abundance is in some ways the opposite of intellect, and Jupiter signifying abundance, Jupiter signifying intellect, and intellect is really important, but
Mercury,
we're not. Huh?
Mercury signifying intellect,
Mercury signifying
Jupiter
intellect.
abundance, Mercury intellect. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, yeah. Yeah, and so that kind of idea of, we need we need the simple, we need the knowledge, we need the intellect, but that's not what astrology is not simply an intellectual, uh, you know, exercise in knowledge, right? But it's also in the alchemical power that comes from that knowledge, you know? So,
Yeah, and it's like I keep hearing these words, and I've been reading about Hermes Trismegistus this morning in preparation for this, and I
mhm,
keep hearing you talk, and it's like I keep hearing Hermes Trismegistus because you say alchemy, right?
mm,
You're talking about
yeah,
light and dark, as above, so below, right? Which is a paraphrase from the Emerald Tablet, which is attributed to Hermes
mm,
Trismegistus in the
mm,
Hermetica as well, and so he's considered like the original teacher of alchemy.
uh,
And so I wanted to kind of dig in a little
yeah,
bit to the figure of Hermes Trismegistus in this
yeah,
episode.
let's
And
do
so
it,
to
yeah,
back up even though
uh-huh,
before that. So
uh-huh,
like
uh-huh,
because it's the Bones of Astrology part 2, and in a lot of ways this should probably be part 1. And when I labeled it the Bones of Astrology part 1, it was just a whimsical after the fact. I looked at all what we talked about and was like, oh, the Bones of Astrology part 1. You know, there it is. It's so named. And it's like
yeah,
I had no idea we were about a second episode or on like in a series or whatever, but then come to find out, like it seems like this has been it was one of the most popular episodes, right? You pointed that out to me
right,
in the analytics that it's like the most views have been the Bones of
uh,
Astrology part 1. So maybe it's the beginning of a bigger project
huh,
with Chiron's Cave,
mhm,
with our teaching and talking about potentially teaching a class. And but
yeah,
anyways, so
yeah,
first principles. So I started thinking about how do we know what we know about astrology? Because like we're talking about exaltations. Okay, where do the exaltations come from? Well, they came from this logic that comes from the Thema Mundi, which is this magical Hellenistic era chart of the world, basically
mm,
horoscope for the creation of the world is essentially
mhm,
what the Thema Mundi is.
mhm,
And then there's all this logic that comes from that for aspects, the exaltations, and more. So anyway, I was just wondering, well, how do we know what we know about astrology in to begin with? Not
mm,
just exaltations, but like
mhm,
where does all this knowledge come from to begin with? Well, so then you end up with ancient Mesopotamia and Babylon, um, is really where it starts, at least in the historical record.
mhm,
So
yeah,
the first thing you got to really, I think the first place to talk about that would be the Babylonian astronomical diaries,
mm, mhm,
which Chris Brennan talked about in a I don't know, it was like I don't even know how long it was. It was a long podcast, like maybe 6 hours or something. At least 3 hours on the history that he did.
wow,
I think it was on the houses. I can't remember, but he talks about it
uh-huh,
um, being, this 700 year. It's like the longest scientific study
mm,
that we in the history of man is what these Babylonian astronomical diaries represent, right? And
mhm,
so if you look at Wikipedia, the article on it, it says that they were kept starting with the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, King Nebuchadnezzar, who is 747 to 734 BC. So these records are supposedly kept from from so, but the records were kept from 652 to 61 BCE, so 600 years. But I guess that it started 100 years sort of before that with this king Nebuchadnezzar.
mm,
And this is also when the Saros cycle, the 18-year Saros cycle was discovered. So these records, though, that they kept, so say for 700 years, right, where they kept these records that were concerned with the astronomy of the time, with respect to, so at the end of every month they would list the level of the river, the Euphrates, commodity exchange values, historical events like wars, disease outbreaks, visits from from kings and officials, and then other cultic activities, and all with respect to what's going on in the heavens, right?
Right.
Essentially the planets and stars along the ecliptic. Paying
Wow.
attention to the ecliptic and the planets and the stars that are there, so the ecliptic being the sun's path, and then comparing that to all those things, and that these are these clay tablets that we have that are known as the Babylonian or Mesopotamian astronomical diaries.
Wow. Okay.
Okay, so that's where kind of like that's where this information starts being written down
Uh-huh.
in the human experience, right?
Right.
I mean, so
Mm.
obviously, so um, that so these diaries are or clay tablets are written in Akkadian, right, which is the language of the Near East, Mesopotamia, from the third millennia BC until about around the time of Abu Mashar, is my
Okay,
understanding.
so 8th century, I believe, would be AD. Yeah?
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
I think I have that right. I have it written down, and then I have 8 BC, but it can't be
Yeah.
that. That's the wrong way because
You're
8
going
would
the
be
yeah,
yeah,
opposite
it'd be the
direction.
wrong.
Yeah,
So it
yeah.
has to be 8 AD, yeah, which is
Okay.
Abu Mashar. I say Old
Uh-huh.
Arabic, I think is what it was said. It replaced Akkadian.
Okay.
So
Akkadian.
the
Okay.
point here is that we're talking about 2,500
Mm.
BC, or
Mhm.
the language. So these tablets are written in a language that's that old, right? I mean, this is the beginning of astrological knowledge.
Mm. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
Um, so I guess what I'm saying is how much of that colors what Hellenistic astrology became, and
Mhm.
therefore what we know astrology to be.
Right.
So,
Right.
because it seems to me like there's three major themes here. There's this era of BC astronomical diaries from Mesopotamia, and then you have the Hellenistic period, which is Alexander the Great, essentially uh, to the era of Christ,
Mhm.
AD,
Mhm.
the Hellenistic period, right?
Right.
And then that Hellenistic era, where the exaltations and where the Thema Mundi come from, like where horoscopic astrology began with the Hellenistic period,
Mhm. Yeah.
and then that stayed pretty much unchanged for you know another 1,500 years to the modern era, where it doesn't really change until depth psychology and the
Right.
Theosophist essentially is
Uh.
the next.
Uh.
So Dane Rudhyar essentially is the specifically, if we're talking about astrology, it didn't change until Dane Rudhyar, and he
Mm.
changed it, but he was following the wave of depth psychology, reading Carl Jung, and then turning that into astrology, like as Carl Jung was writing, like you
Uh-huh.
know
Uh-huh. Yeah.
along with him. So like astrology began changing in the modern era. And then you also have the Theosophists and what they were doing, like people like Alan Leo
Mm.
and
Mhm.
their contribution.
Mhm.
So right around 1900, right,
Mm.
astrology
Mhm.
starts to change into what it has become now.
Right.
Essentially, the Theosophists changed. They became sun sign, right? Alan Leo's how sun sign astrology basically started. Because before
Mm.
Alan Leo, there wasn't really sun sign astrology. Not like it is like where most people, that's all they know of astrology, right? Sun sign astrology. That didn't happen until the turn of the 20th century. Yeah, that's I say that right. 1900,
Uh-huh.
right?
Right. Yeah.
So that was a long-winded kind of way of a quick sort of synopsis of the big picture, how we know what we know about astrology. And there's a world in that we could talk about. A lot of worlds in that.
Yeah.
So I don't know. What are your thoughts at so far with all that?
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
lot, I
So
know, but
yeah. So I would say definitely want to come back and maybe we can do another segment on it because I think, like you said, there's worlds upon worlds within what that large overview. But I think it's a good contextual, uh, you're situating it broadly, but also contextualizing it. And I think that's a really good place to start. I would say, as far as even talking about, this more recent westernized connection to and maybe reinvention or bringing modernizing some of those more ancient principles into the modern landscape of the early 1900s and early 2000 20th century, early 20th century, that some of the, even like when it becomes psychologicalized, um that Jung actually, I believe, went back to a lot of, of these alchemical ideas. And I would love to just explore and research and maybe even do a segment on like Hermes Trismegistus and in Jung's work, right? Because like that, he, he pulls that in full circle too. But yeah, I mean, I'm following everything you're saying, and I think it's really the thread of the contribution of even this mysterious Hermes figure. um it goes, it's from the beginning, right? And it, like, that thread continues throughout all of it has continued throughout all of the historical understandings of not just astronomy but astrology and alchemy. And you mentioned, you've been studying him a little bit this morning, kind of as a figure in and of himself. Do you think that that's important, or did you want to talk about anything on that? Yes.
so Hermes Trismegistus, right? So
Hmm.
who is that?
Yeah.
Well, essentially, it's a legendary figure
Uh-huh.
of the Hellenistic era. Okay, so he is a syncretic combination of Hermes, right, the Greek god Hermes,
Mhm.
and the
Mhm.
Egyptian god Thoth or Thoth. Or also, I recently heard pronounced Thought,
Hmm.
which is really interesting if you think about
Mhm.
Mercury and what
Yeah.
Mercury means as a planet, and that Mercury is the god whose name in Egyptian could also be pronounced Thought. I
Right.
mean,
Right.
there's a lot to think about there, right? Like,
Right.
so that's really interesting. But some of the interesting things I've discovered about Hermes Trismegistus.
Mhm.
So the Muslims, or a lot of Muslims, believe that Hermes Trismegistus is the same person as Idris, who was a
Mm.
prophet,
Mm.
the second prophet supposedly mentioned in the Quran after Adam,
Huh.
right?
Wow.
So Muslim scholars of the classical and medieval period associate Hermes with this prophet Idris,
Mm.
uh, who is between Adam and Noah. Okay, who is also known as Enoch in the Jewish Christian tradition, who entered heaven alive in some explanations of Enoch. Like, he actually like ascended into heaven alive and
Mhm.
lived for 365 years.
Hmm.
365 days in a
Mhm.
year. But he lived for
Mhm.
365 years. So this is an
Mhm.
antediluvian figure, right, in the biblical tradition. So pre-Noah's flood. Uh and was the son of Jared and the father of Methuselah. And he was known as the scribe of judgment.
Mhm. Huh.
Judgment being, if you look at the mythic tarot anyway, right, you have the magician Hermes, and then you have judgment
Yep.
Hermes. as his role as psychopomp. Okay, right?
Yep.
Scribe of
Mhm.
judgment. So
Mhm.
so this figure Hermes Trismegistus, by the Muslim of classical medieval Muslim, so Abu Mashar, his time
Right.
period,
Right.
considered him to be this Quran figure. Yeah, there's the mythical
So
tarot
yeah. Abu
Idris.
Mashar. Mhm.
Yep. And then also he came to be associated with Enoch as well in the Christian.
Mhm.
Um, so who's thought the Egyptian god? So because remember, this is a syncretic, what did I say? Syncretic combination
Right.
of Hermes and Thoth, which
Mhm.
Thoth, the Egyptian god. I like Thoth because I think that's perfect. I heard
Mm.
Gemini Brett say that,
Mhm.
pronounce it Thoth, and he mentioned
Mhm.
like, you know, I was just like, it blew my mind when I heard it. It's just sometimes just you hear that one thing, it's like, wow, that's
Mhm.
perfect. It makes perfect
Mhm.
sense. Everything
Right.
I know about Hermes and
Mhm.
Mercury. So
Mhm.
throughout the tarot and astrology and just the occult in general, yeah.
It's
So
consistent.
Thoth. So
Mhm.
who's Thoth? Thoth is the god. The Egyptian god Thoth is the god of the moon. So he's the moon god.
Mhm.
So there you see, we've talked about it before, the association with the moon and Mercury,
Yeah.
especially in alchemy. So the god of the moon, wisdom, knowledge, writing, hieroglyph, science, magic, and judgment. That's what all thought is,
Mhm.
the Egyptian god. And then, of course, Hermes Mercury. So this figure, Hermes Trismegistus, is like this mythical figure combining these two gods
Mhm.
from the Hellenistic period. So
Mhm.
presumably there actually was a historical person, but so like in the medieval, like Renaissance period, like I guess there's this confusion because they didn't know that. So the school of this Hermeticism, it was a school of Alexandrian times. It was an occult school, right? Hermeticism was. They attributed all their writings to this figure Hermes Trismegistus, but the writings attributed to him are really they're the writings of this particular cult of
Mhm. Mhm.
Hermeticism, which also gets confused with Gnosticism because the two uh, were contemporary,
Uh-huh.
right? Kind of
Right.
happening at the same
Same
time.
time. Mhm.
So there's a lot of confusion. But then, and apparently in the 1600s, someone pointed out that it couldn't possibly have been written by this one figure, and I guess all of Hermeticism collapsed in the occult. It was like this huge blow
It was
to the
yeah.
antiquity of it, or whatever.
Uh-huh. The fragile unifying element. Yeah.
Yeah. But then, there's it mentions in the wiki article about uh the many Christian writers, so Lactantius, Augustine, Marsilio, Ficino, Campanella, Giovanni Pico della Mirandola,
Mhm.
Giordano Bruno,
Mhm.
um, all big names in the
Mhm.
occult, especially like medieval Renaissance,
Oh, yeah.
style, Picatrix, magic, era.
Right. Right.
Platonist, a lot of them. I know a lot of those, like, I'm pretty sure Marsilio Ficino. I don't know if I'm
Yeah.
saying that right or not. I know
Mhm.
that James Hillman was a big fan of him, and
Yeah.
he was a Platonist or a
Right.
Neoplatonist.
Mhm.
So all these figures, though, believed Hermes to be a wise pagan prophet who foresaw the coming of Christianity. And I guess all these people believed in what was
Wow.
called the Prisca Theologia,
Huh.
which is it's a single true theological thread supposedly running through all religions. So I heard that and I was like, oh, that's the primordial philosophy.
Mhm.
Same thing. And then apparently, I guess, so then let me go into then Abu Mashar, right? Because and now we're getting close to what started this whole thing with the exaltations, right? Like what with this Chris Brennan and
Mhm.
Dyke's episode on the exaltations, because they're referencing this Abu Mashar, this new translation of Abu Mashar, who was referencing Hermes Trismegistus. So what did Abu Mashar have to say about Hermes Trismegistus? Well, he says that he's the thrice wise due to there's three figures, like he had a threefold origin, Hermes Trismegistus did. One, as thought, the civilizing hero, who is the initiator into the mysteries of the divine sciences. Like, this is Abu Mashar saying this. And then the second phase is the Babylonian initiator of Pythagoras. And then the third phase is the first teacher of alchemy. Because Hermes Trismegistus is attributed to like the beginning of alchemy.
Right. Yeah.
So like with the Philosopher's Stone, so then now you're talking about the Emerald Tablet, right? As above, so below. That's where that phrase comes from. It's a paraphrase from, I guess, the second phrase of the Emerald Tablet, as above, so below. And so in that it's a sort of a manual on the creating the Philosopher's Stone. And so the term hermetically sealed comes from the seal of Hermes, which is to fuse the neck of a glass vessel to make the Philosopher's Stone. So again, I just dumped a lot out there. What I'm trying to do is, clumsily, is paint a picture of who Hermes Trismegistus is. Right. And it's not hyperbolic to say that Hermes Trismegistus is the most important figure in not only the occult sciences of antiquity since the Hellenistic period, but also of astrology. And that's with this new Abu Mashar translation, right? With him referencing a lost, writing of attributed to Hermes Trismegistus. So this Hermetic school of Alexandria, essentially, of Alexandria, the Hellenistic period, rather. So, and Chris Brennan and Ben Dykes talk about this too. It's like if this is all true, which it is, right? It means that this Hermes Trismegistus is almost single-handedly, right, creating Hellenistic astrology.
Yeah.
So it's coming from Hermeticism, with astrology. So that's why I started with Mesopotamia, right, and the astronomical diaries of Babylon, because that's what you have until you get to the Hellenistic period. Because then Hellenistic combines Mesopotamian and Egyptian and Greek worlds.
Yeah. And it's so incredibly rich, and everything you shared is really rich. It makes me, so the other thing when you talk about it, going back to ancient Egypt, there's a book called Alchemy, the Divine Work. And I will not even say that it's a very big, fat book. But in this, in the beginning of this, it says alchemy's symbolic grandfather and grandmother emerged from this time, namely the threefold great Hermes and Mary the prophetess. So Mary the prophetess was another character, but it also references an image. You can see that. Well, you really probably can't see it very well. But under the footnote here, it talks about how Cleopatra, who obviously was the queen of Egypt, was a female alchemist who worked in Alexandria in the 200s and 300s. So she was, along with Mary the prophetess and the thrice great Hermes, the grandfathers of ancient alchemy. And that this is before, and this is around the time, like as you described. And I think you laid out a great picture of how as early as and as far back as the beginning of writing, when we started to even be able to put these concepts, these ideas, philosophies into written context, there was this generation of, and I don't mean generation like like Pluto's generation, but like the generative element of bringing these ideas into form. And at their earliest roots, they were alchemical, and in a sense, that of course this is just Egypt, but the Hebrew, the these different parts of the world were more connected at the time, and that from that came, the inherited concept. And so going back to the Thema Mundi, where if this is the point of origin of Western astrology, that it is. See, I never really thought of the Thema Mundi. I never really gave it that much attention. I'm a little sorry to say, because to me it just seemed like a symbolic, um, you know, chart of the world. And it's like, well, how would you know the beginning of the date of the world or creation, or, like, it seemed really random or arbitrary almost. But not anymore. Not anymore. Now, as I think Ben Dykes called it, he called it some kind of mandala, right? And Jung was really big on mandalas and the nature of like the contemplative
I think you
power
call
of
it a
an
hermetic
image.
mandala.
Yeah, hermetic mandala. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, and it's like, and even like the mandalas that you do, that you create, a birth chart is a mandala, whether we're pulling it up on software or we're, creating it with reverence by hand. So the power of a mandala, if this is in fact, if the Thema Mundi is a mandala that was created by or put into formulation by Hermes Trismegistus, and like you said, the idea of, okay, well, who was that? And it absolutely sounds like it was a literal person. I mean, the book of Enoch, isn't that in biblical, I mean, I think in like biblical scholarship today, that is a huge point of discussion around, was this book left out of the modern biblical canon on purpose because it contains certain facets or aspects of alchemy, or the human, reality of how we work with energy as humans, or light and dark, that would not be acceptable and would be a place of maybe, I mean, I won't go off on that track, but that idea of the Book of Enoch, if that's connected, that I think is really fascinating as well, um so
Well, you're talking, antediluvian, right? So about pre-Noah. You're talking about a figure before Noah, or no, before Noah's flood. So I mean, we're talking about a mythical figure here. The Hermeticism is a product of Alexandrian Egypt. So the Hellenistic period.
so when you say mythical figure, are you saying that Hermes is a mythical figure?
No, Hermes Trismegistus.
Okay, the thrice
I mean,
great.
yeah, if he's
Right.
associated with this Idris, with Enoch, with a
Mhm.
combination of thought and Hermes, I
Mm,
mean,
mm.
obviously we're not talking about a actual man. Like, you could talk about this like, well, I wanted to say like you talk about Jesus, because Jesus was actually a man, right? Like, Jesus of Nazareth
Right,
actually existed, but like,
right.
I don't want to piss off a bunch of Christians by saying Hermes Trismegistus is like Jesus, but I mean, in the occult world, it really is like the occult Jesus, like we're talking about here. You know?
Right, but and I think that's what's so fascinating, is that just like Jesus was a literal human, there's so much built up around in the mythological kind of narrative around, and the meaning and the signification, that I believe something. I mean, would you say that Hermes Trismegistus was actually there was a human, or some form
Yeah,
of human that existed, and
I
yet
think
we still, it's like it's the snowball of what he's associated with and how he's connected.
the reality here is that it's not a one man. It is a series of elders in the Hermetic tradition of the Hellenistic period of
Mm,
Alexandrian Egypt, of the Hellenistic period, which is actually after. I was just looking the dates of like what's considered Hellenistic,
uh-huh. Uh-huh.
um, and it's so basically defined by so the Hellenistic period is, let's see, I'll just read this. In classical antiquity, the Hellenistic period covers the time in Greek and Mediterranean history after classical Greece, between the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BC and the death of
Mm.
Cleopatra the Seventh in 30 BC. which is followed by the ascendancy of the Roman Empire.
And the death of who? Can you read that last part again?
Cleopatra the Seventh in 30 BC. So it's roughly a 300-year period from the death of Alexander the Great to the rise of the Roman Empire. That's the Hellenistic period.
Yeah.
But then you have a couple hundred years after that where it's like, it's not considered the Hellenistic period, but when you talk about Hellenistic astrology, Ptolemy was Hellenistic astrology, and Ptolemy was like 180 AD or so, like, 2nd century.
Right.
So there's, so really we're talking about like a 600, really you're talking about that's why I keep saying Alexandrian Egypt, right? Because that's where the library of Alexandria was like the first internet, right? Like it was the first compilation and collation of world knowledge in one place. It was the internet of antiquity.
Trying to look up the year of the burning of the library.
Was it the library? What was it? Nicaea involved the library? It was the Alexandrian library.
Right. That was. Oh, it was burned multiple times. Okay. Yeah. But it does look like one of those times was like 385, between 385 and 412 maybe. But I was just trying to piece that together with, Alexander the Great and kind of what was happening historically. But anyway, because I find that stuff really fascinating and interesting, just in the influence that it had on the Western world, because it definitely, it did. And the Thema Mundi, what I guess the connection I'm drawing it to with the astrology of the moment here in the Thema Mundi is that the degree of the sun in the Thema Mundi, and we were talking about this a little bit yesterday, the degree of the sun being Leo in, what is it, 15 degrees, I think. Leo 15 degrees is so that I thought was so cool, because you know how the Lionsgate portal is a very common, I don't know if you see it like on social media and stuff, but every year on the Lionsgate portal, it's an energetic kind of energy portal that is loosely associated with astrology, but has a lot of people do ritual, and it has deep significance. Well, Demetra George in Ancient Astrology and Theory and Practice, Volume 1, in Chapter 12, and that was a good recommendation for me to go back and kind of look over this, because I noticed that she says here the Thema Mundi is timed to the Egyptian New Year, which begins in summer with the heliacal rising of the sun Sirius that announces the flooding of the Nile River. And like you said, these ancient, what are they called? That recorded everything you started to,
the Babylonian astronomical diaries.
Right. So they would have been, probably connected here. It says in ancient Egypt, the first appearance of the star Sirius coincided with the sun's presence in the zodiacal sign of Leo.
Right.
And the 15 degree of Leo is August the 8th in like current, in the ephemeris. Yeah. So like in the American ephemeris, as of today, this year, it shows that 15 degrees Leo is on August the 8th, which I think is interesting, because that's the date that the Lionsgate portal is celebrated, and Sirius is the lion, right? So that a heliacal rising star can only be seen in the pre-dawn hours. And during the zodiacal month of Leo, Cancer by necessity must be the sign rising over the horizon at dawn, when Sirius has its first visibility at this time of year. Thus, the Thema Mundi has Cancer as the ascendant, with the sun in Leo. Egyptian astrotheology held that the heliacal rising of a star represented the birth or rebirth of stars, and hence the rebirth of souls who were encased in stars, a fitting moment for the birth of the world. So, like, you can see how Egyptian mythology is so influential in the way that we understand dignity, essential, planetary rulerships, essential dignities, exaltations. I mean, Egyptian mythology and philosophy is, you know, like if regardless of kind of who, although I think it matters, and I'm really deeply interested. I don't mean to say I'm not, but wherever the the thought or the influence of the Hermes Trismegistus came from, it seems very closely tied with Egyptian history as well, too. You know.
Yeah, so the Hellenistic rising of Sirius for
Mhm.
the Egyptians
Mhm.
was like the largest natural phenomenon. It was the most important natural phenomenon because of how important the Nile was, because it
Right.
coincided with I want to say, the inundation of the Nile. So when it brought all the water
Mhm.
to their fields, basically for irrigation,
Mhm.
um, it was like the new year for them almost. Like it was like so. But the
It was,
interesting
yeah.
point here is that this is what, 4,000 years ago. You know
Mhm. Mhm.
that was the case then. That's why this time of year was so important.
Mhm.
Okay, but now, what what is July to us, right? In our civilization now, well, it's just the middle of summer. It's the middle of
Right.
one of the seasons in the northern hemisphere anyway. It's the middle of one of our four seasons,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
that's it.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Who gives a
And
shit when Sirius is rising? I mean, nobody cares. I
yeah.
mean, I'm not saying it doesn't matter, right? I'm saying,
Uh-huh.
what my point that I'm trying to make here is that, what is astrology to become? So all of this knowledge of antiquity, of
Mhm.
thousands of years ago, starting with the diaries of you know
Mhm.
the astronomical diaries of Mesopotamia,
Right.
where all of this started coming into, like, the meaning of it, like astrology started evolving, right? Because and then so the Mesopotamians finally they came up with this 12-fold division of the zodiac, and then the Egyptians had their 36 decanates, and then the Alexandrian Greeks came along and then combined all of that in Alexandria. All of those cultures came together with the king of the world, Alexander,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Who there was an entry for when he visited in these diaries. Like, it was one of the things that was mentioned was Alexander, the king of the world, came. You know,
Wow. Yeah.
um.
Mhm.
So 2,000 years ago, plus 2,500 years ago,
Mhm.
and all of this astrology has all of this meaning. And so, but I keep thinking, what is it going to become?
Mhm. Yeah.
Should it evolve? Because what's happening is that now, in our thirst for culture, we're going back, and it should be done. Like, we need to understand where this came from for the rationale, like with the exaltations. Okay, now we can talk about, well, probably how the exaltations came to be, right? And it's all based on the Thema Mundi, which is based on the Hellenistic rising of Sirius.
Mhm. Mhm.
So
And the
all of
idea.
astrology, all of modern Hellenistic, all of what astrology has become, pinned on the Thema Mundi, all can be pinpointed to the Hellenistic rising of Sirius and this one figure, Hermes Trismegistus.
Right. And I have to say too, I don't it's interesting too because currently Jupiter is in Cancer, and tropical Jupiter, tropical Cancer,
Mm-hmm.
and in the Thema Mundi, Jupiter is at 15 degrees Cancer on the ascendant, and like you said, the importance of the Nile and the flooding of the Nile for fecundity, crops,
No,
sustaining of
no, no,
life.
no. Jupiter's not in Cancer for the Thuma Mundi. He's exalted in Cancer,
Oh,
right?
exalted,
Yeah,
exalted. Yes, that's what
Jupiter's
I'm.
in Sagittarius in the Thema Mundi.
Right, right. For domicile. Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah.
Right.
So, in the exaltation chart, he is right on the ascendant in
Yes.
Cancer. Yeah. And so what I think is interesting about because in the Thema Mundi chart, yeah, so the actual exaltation chart shows that Jupiter is in Cancer on the ascendant, and at the point where the sun at 8 or at 15 degrees in the Thema Mundi chart, Cancer would have had to have been rising, right? So it shows the importance of Jupiterian, like where Jupiter in Cancer has to do with vegetation and nurturing life, and the water energy of being able to sustain life and agriculture and human society, that's important, and that we're currently so similar themes of, and I'm tying this back to your question, because as long as there is a physical manifestation or human life on this planet, we're going to be concerned with drawing meaning that is going to try to help us sustain ourselves, right? And like and to have our needs met, and to be able, in that kind of Jupiter Cancer way, continue to have what we need, and love and life and prosperity and abundance in some capacity or some way, shape, or form. And we're going to, and I'm talking kind of metaphorically here, but we're going to want to avoid Saturn. Saturn is going to, the energy of everything that Saturn represents and embodies, if in the way of decay and death and annihilation, humans, I think, have a tendency toward uh, trying to move away from that. And so, to go back to your question of like, what is it to become? Well, what is the goal? Because if the goal is historical, if like you said, it's important to go back to these things, but are we historians? No. And Ben Dykes made that point. I mean, we can be, but Ben Dykes made the point when he said most historians aren't going to be interested and haven't been interested. That's why it's laid latent for 1,000 years, because most historians aren't going to care enough about the astrology principles to try to repiece this together. So if we're not just going back to be historians, and yet there is something important to be taken from it, like a true Aquarius, you're like, okay, there's the importance of the past, but like also let's look to the future as a collective, as a humanity, and what is the role of astrology in that movement, and that looking forward. So do you have any like major thoughts about what this helps to do in trying to formulate what direction astrology goes in the future?
Yeah, so there's this idea in the occult community, pagan community, right, that older is better. John
Mhm,
Michael Greer's talked about this a good bit.
mhm,
And it's not that it's true, but it's also not true.
mhm,
Like, in a sense, we're talking about the difference between conservatism and liberalism, or
mhm,
progressivism, right? And conservatism. Like, it's like conservatism is the old heuristics that we know that work, that we guard because we know they work, and then there's constantly pushback. There's trying to move the goalposts into new territories because shit changes, right? So like you
mhm,
can't stay stagnant, or
mhm,
you need to progress. But also
mhm.
you don't need to throw out everything from the past. So it's like the idea that older is better. Well, sometimes, yeah, old is good because it's tried and true, but doesn't mean that we need to write it needs to be written in stone, right? So that's the case with astrology, I
We need
feel.
evolution. We need to
Yes.
evolve. Right. There's
Because
an
who gives a
evolutionary
shit about
process.
Sirius rising, like, in the Nile flooding, like, right? Like, that doesn't apply to us anymore. So why should we all of everything in
But
modern astrology
but
depend to that?
okay, yeah, I
The
see what you're
logic of
saying.
it.
Right, but I would say that's the symbolism of the importance, the symbolism and why it was important, than understanding, because certain things about human nature don't change over time. So
Right.
like you starting to like thinking about it symbolically, it could have usefulness, right? And even understanding contextually, if we're working on principles that are derived from a model that goes back that far, then understanding the historical context of why and how that model was formulated, if we're using those principles, makes sense. And so, do we reinvent the wheel, literally, because now we know where those points came from, and what model is going to be more comprehensive or relevant to our day and age. I mean, I think that's to say that we might know what that might be would be for me bold and untrue, right? But I think, yeah, there could be a place of evolution for sure.
Well, when you reinvent the wheel in these waters, you become what's known as a cult.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If you're recreating your own wheel, like
Yeah.
like the Hermetic cult created that wheel.
Well, yeah. I mean, am I saying we need to? It's just my Aquarian nature, honestly. I just,
Yeah.
it's like I see. Okay, this is the logic for exaltations, right? To bring it back to that,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
they're all it's all theoretical, and it's based on this worldview,
Yeah.
Aristotelian, you know, uh, uh, Platonist,
Well, but more so
worldview.
Hermetic, Like that's part of why Ptolemy couldn't quite make it work, because he was trying to apply, like when he was trying to understand, I think, the Thema Mundi, he was trying to apply Aristotelian,
Wet, dry,
like
cold, hot.
right, and it didn't fit because it was more Hermetic. But yes, it's our worldview and our schema and our way of understanding reality has changed so much that in some ways, like you're saying, it almost could seem, not to be too blasphemous, but like arbitrary. Like, did you get that feeling? Like, I got this feeling when he was explaining,
Yeah,
because I mean, he goes into such detail about like why Venus has to be exalted in Pisces, in late Pisces versus early Pisces. And it's like, some of that
based.
seems really arbitrary,
Well,
right?
even then, it was based on with Ptolemy. He was trying to make it fit on the equator,
Uh-huh.
the
Uh-huh. Yeah.
astronomy of the equator.
Oh yeah. Well, so was
Is
I mean, this is I mean, the
Abu
whole,
Mashar?
right. Yeah. I mean, he was basing it on Hermes logic, or the rationale of Hermes was based on the equatorial, right? That's how I understood it, but yeah. So,
You know, I've got 2 pages of notes. I mean, we could
yeah.
talk about
You want to go
all
into
the
it?
stuff that's come to light. Well, I don't know if we should or not, because we've been so broad, and it's like
Uh-huh.
what this conversation is more about the
Hmm.
meaning. I would say the meaning in astrology.
Right.
Well, the origins of it,
Uh-huh.
and we certainly could talk about the technical breakdown of
Hmm.
the exaltations, but I think it's enough at this point to just state that the mystery has been solved as far as what
Hmm.
we talked about in the Bones of Astrology Part 1, with where did the exaltations come from? Well, they
Uh-huh.
came from this logic based on a Thema Mundi,
Yeah, and
essentially.
that's right. That's like the really short answer. And I would love, I mean, in some capacity, to, like, maybe as an also equally general. It's hard to be general without going into the same level of minutia and detail that they went into, but it's like the rationale behind it. It was like when we were talking about Saturn and Libra, and I was kind of trying to think about, well, why would Saturn be exalted in Libra? That,
Death of light. That's in this logic, which is great. That's where it comes
uh-huh.
from, right?
Uh-huh.
Because
Uh-huh.
at the autumnal equinox, which we're days away from,
Mhm.
right? Night overtakes day.
Mhm.
The night becomes longer than the day at that point.
Mhm.
And it's the
Yeah.
opposite at the spring equinox, where Aries is, which is where the sun is exalted in the
Right.
middle of Aries, which is where the day overtakes the night,
Mhm. And
right? And
so
then
for the sun, that's important. The sun needs to be where there's light. That's
it's rising at that point. The sun is rising to the peak of Cancer, which is the solstice, the highest peak of power for the sun, right? The longest day, and then dies at Capricorn. The
Mhm.
sun dies at Capricorn and is reborn.
And
That's
so that if you
Christmas and Jesus. I mean,
right,
with
but thinking
Capricorn.
about the yeah, but thinking about the nature of Saturn and what it signifies, Saturn needs to be in a place where darkness is increasing.
Yep.
Like, that's the logic, right?
Yeah.
Because and is it And this goes into, okay, is an exaltation or a domicile like a rulership or an exaltation stronger? And, it sounds like you might be leaning one way and I'm leaning the other, at least at this
Well,
point. But the idea is that as darkness is descending with Saturn, that it's descending, but it's not as dark as it is when Saturn is in rulership in Aquarius. And whether that's better, stronger, weaker, or not, that's the nature of the narrative, is that as it's getting darker, the exalted Saturn, and then when it gets to the darkest point, that's when you have Saturn ruling Aquarius, because Aquarius is in kind of the dark of winter, right? Like,
isn't it Capricorn in the Thema Mundi?
yeah,
Isn't
Capricorn. It's Capricorn
because
rulership.
Saturn flees to Aquarius because it's the only sign that's left. Because like
Right.
the sun's in Leo, right? The sun advances into Cancer. No, sorry,
Yes.
advances into Virgo, which causes Mercury to flee all the way as far away as he can, which is Gemini, and then all planets
Right.
follow suit, right? So Saturn
Right.
is in Capricorn in the Thema
Yes.
Mundi, which is
Right,
where the
right.
sun
The
dies.
right, the first ruler. So yeah, I was like kind of drawing a blank. I mean, I that was my gap in, but yeah, thank you. That's exactly right. So yeah, Capricorn rulership darkest, and then Aquarius he flees, and those two happen to be close together. But for
Yeah,
all of the dual
Aquarius was just
rule,
what was left.
yeah, it
Like,
was literally like right next to him, and so, but yeah, it's still
the
pretty
sun's
dark.
detriment.
So yeah, and it still works because it's still pretty dark at that point, and the sun's detriment, yeah, because it's the opposite of Leo, and
Leo.
Leo is the brightest. But I thought that was pretty interesting
No, the
too with
hottest. The
the
brightest is
hottest.
Cancer.
Brightest is Cancer. Okay, yeah, yeah. So I thought it was really cool. It made sense to me and I know we don't have any like visual images, but you can see it on the wheel when you start looking at the rulerships, because after the luminaries, the sun and the moon, then he literally goes through, or whoever, set the initial rulerships, but going in sequential distance from the sun, that's how the order of the planets were placed as far as rulers of each sign. And so, and then again, like you said, when you're describing the going as far away, that to me, I can't visualize that unless I see it on the wheel, because it goes literally across the, um it goes up rather than like over. I'm not a visual person. I mean, I'm not a spatial person, so it's like I had to see it before it made sense to me. um so yeah, so you got the sun, or you got the moon and the sun, and then it goes from the distance from the sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn along the signs. And
Yeah, so
so
as the sun moves into Virgo, Mercury flees all the way to Gemini, and then Venus flees to Taurus, and then Mars flees to Aries,
Mhm.
Jupiter flees to Pisces, Saturn, all that's left is Aquarius. So he flees
Yeah.
to Aquarius as the sun progresses through the seasons, right?
Hmm.
Because the
Hmm.
sun
Yeah.
moves from Leo to Virgo.
Hmm. Yeah, and so
But that's
it's
the
really.
Thema Mundi here on the screen for anyone who's maybe didn't.
Mhm. Yeah.
Do you see all my tabs and everything up there too, or do you just see the chart on your
No, I
screen?
don't see your tabs. I just see the chart.
Okay, cool.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, so, and I mean, it's poetic. Like, to go back to that, question of, well, is it arbitrary? But it is poetic. It has like you know, a certain kind of poetic beauty to it, because in an Aristotelian way. But yeah, like, the now when we're interpreting our day-to-day lives based on these ideas, it's nice to know where they come from. But is there more truth now because we know where it
Well,
comes from?
I think what we're dealing with is language. Astrology is a
Mhm.
language, and the language exists.
It's very hermetic in that way. It's Hermes, it's
S-
Mercury, right?
And
Hmm.
so it's a language based on a logic,
Uh-huh.
and the logic of what astrology mostly is got captured at this period with this during Hellenistic Greece, the Hellenistic period and past.
Mhm.
It's like it got locked in where that's where horoscopic astrology started, right?
Mm-hmm.
400 BC was the first horoscope, Babylonian horoscope. But like that's before, that's like was for a king or something. Like it's or I don't even think at any rate it was another 600 years before it was a common thing that just any person could go get a horoscope.
Right. Yeah.
And so what I'm saying is that, like, for the most part, astrology is horoscopic astrology,
Mm-hmm.
judicial, right?
Mm-hmm.
Astrology,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so all the rules that of the language that we speak, astrologies, well,
Mm-hmm.
that's where it comes from. It comes from the essentially all of the knowledge from uh the Babylonian astronomical diaries, and the zodiac creation in Mesopotamia, the 12-fold zodiac, the 36 decanates of Egypt and Greece, and the Greeks and their gods and their occult knowledge, basically Pythagoras, essentially, and Plato and Aristotle, right? All of those things came together and formed what astrology essentially is, even to this day. That got altered, like I was saying in the beginning of this, right? It got altered with depth psychology. That was the next evolution in astrology.
Mm-hmm.
Still, though, horoscopic. And I would argue where astrology is strongest, at least with respect to modern man, where it applies still using this ancient language that we're still using, is going to be archetypal astrology.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting point here is with archetypal astrology is that what is most important, it seems to me, is the outer planets, which weren't even part of Hellenistic because they didn't even know about them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and you see this division in astrology between those going back to the Hellenistic stuff where it's just the 7 visible
Right.
planets,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And don't even
Right.
pay attention to the outer planets. It's like, no, how are you going to,
Yeah.
you can't not pay attention to the outer planets. Like, we know they're there. Just because it screws up the geometry of 7 and 12,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know. So it's like
And
you got to do both.
right. Well, exactly. And I think, something that caught my attention as I was looking over these chapters again is that Demetra George mentions that um, the uh, like the traditional astrologers, or at least kind of the school, that she's created and developed, and that a lot of, like, they don't use the 7 in the interpretation of rulerships, but they do use outer planets. Many Hellenistic astrologers or traditional astrologers do use the outer planets. They still look at the outer planets in the birth chart, but they don't. It's a little bit more. It's a little bit closer to that hybrid. Um, they're looking at the outer planets, but they're not looking at them as rulers within the birth chart, or even ruling houses, or whether if that's by transit or in natal interpretation. But I wanted to say too, what did you want to say something about that? Because and I'll
Go ahead. I can say, I always say
um,
more. I can
well,
always.
I want to hear it, but the Pluto that which you were mentioning too kind of goes back to and I want us to have a conversation at whatever point about the age of Aquarius, and like the timing of the age of Aquarius too, because even though we didn't even know about Pluto. It's interesting how in retrospect, how sometimes planets that, like you just mentioned, are um, discovered much later, have an impact or have a part of the story that may be part of a larger cohesive narrative of human experience, but they don't enter the stage until later, but they were always part of and then of course you have to talk about, like, what is the nature of time, because it's like, did they have no influence just because we didn't know about them? Was Pluto not an energy just because we didn't know about it, or was Pluto something that became a part of human history as we developed the capacity for Pluto in our individual and collective psyche, right? It's like, so it kind of goes to that archetypal psychological astrology that you're referring to, But nonetheless, like you said, if the future direction, archetypal, I'm not saying that, uh, I would say that it's meaningful to think about archetypal astrology and think about a new type of astrology that is both archetypal but also alchemical. And it combines, and archetypal astrology, I think by its very nature is inclusive of a certain kind of hermetic approach, wouldn't you say? I mean, do you think?